In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd threw a stone into a cave on the shores of the Dead Sea in Palestine. The sound of ancient ceramics breaking revealed manuscripts that the academic world was not ready to accept. Those scrolls, over 2,000 years old, contained a forbidden testimony about what Noah saw in the flood. A testimony so disturbing that entire generations of scribes and religious leaders decided to erase it forever. According to those ancient texts, Noah was not simply a passive survivor of the cataclysm that devastated the world. He was a direct witness to something so devastating that the guardians of faith conspired to bury it in oblivion. What he beheld in the midst of the waters of judgment challenges the very foundations of religion as we know it. But the truth has a mysterious way of surviving even when the powerful try to completely destroy it. Fragments of that testimony were hidden in desert caves, in oral traditions, and in banned texts. What you are about to discover completely transforms the narrative of the flood that you were taught since childhood. However, before revealing what Noah beheld, we must understand the world that the waters came to destroy. It was not the simple and pastoral world that Genesis presents in its official, edited and carefully summarized version. It was a cosmos on the brink of total collapse, a land that shone with a knowledge too terrible to exist. Humanity walked alongside beings of immense celestial power, entities known in the texts as the Watchers. These beings were children of God who crossed a sacred boundary that should never have been violated by anyone. They voluntarily descended to Earth and taught forbidden arts to the human beings they found there. Advanced metallurgy, sophisticated warfare techniques, sorcery, and deep secrets of the cosmos were their teachings. They took wives from among the daughters of men, and from those forbidden unions were born the Nephilim, giants of legend. They were hybrid beings of immense power that completely destabilized the natural order of all creation. The whole earth was filled with a very specific violence, a corruption that had its origin in the supernatural. The very genetic code of creation was being altered and corrupted by these rebellious celestial entities. God saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, but the text hides a much greater scandal. That evil was not simply of human origin, but had been orchestrated and planned from the heavenly realms. A rebellion that erupted in the celestial spheres had spilled like poison onto the very ground of Eden. Noah, a preacher of righteousness, found himself completely alone in the midst of the approaching storm. I was not simply building a vessel to survive a flood of extraordinary proportions. I was preparing a sacred ark to preserve the truth amid the total destruction of the known world. The waters of the flood came to purify something infinitely deeper and darker than simple human sin. At the precise moment when the heavens opened with fury, Noah beheld the true battle of the universe. But to understand their vision in all its magnitude, we need to explore the invisible architecture of the ancient cosmos. Before the flood, there was a perfect order with concentric heavens inhabited by hierarchies of angelic beings. Angels, archangels, thrones, dominions, and powers formed a celestial harmony designed by the Creator himself. Then, a catastrophic fracture occurred that destroyed that harmony and transformed everything forever. The Book of Enoch, a text deliberately excluded from your Bible, details that rebellion with chilling precision. 200 watchers, led by the figures of Shemi-Haza and Azazel, descended together to Mount Hermon. There they made a solemn pact among themselves and profaned the earthly kingdom with their strictly forbidden presence. It was not simple angelic curiosity that drove them to descend, but a calculated betrayal against the Creator himself. They implanted in humanity a devastating knowledge that forever destroyed the original innocence of the human being. The Nephilim were beings that should not exist under any natural law, hybrids that violated the design of creation. God's response was to send the flood, but this is where the key that was systematically forbidden is found. It was a surgical strike of divine precision against a cosmic-scale infection that threatened all of reality. The waters of judgment acted as an instrument of purification that operated in two dimensions simultaneously. Noah was chosen not only for his moral integrity, but also for his unique ability to serve as a witness. He was to become the faithful chronicler of the true extent of the judgment that was about to fall upon the whole earth. The veil between the realms was torn before their mortal eyes, and what they witnessed was deemed too dangerous. Too dangerous for future generations of humanity to know it without any restrictions whatsoever. Now imagine the total rupture, 40 days and 40 nights of absolute cataclysm shaking the entire planet. It was not a gentle rain falling on green fields, as shown in the illustrations of children's books. The windows of heaven shattered into 1,000 pieces, and primordial chaos seized every corner of the known earth. In the midst of that unprecedented devastation, Noah looked out from inside the ark, and his eyes beheld the unimaginable. Noah not only watched humanity drowning in the relentless waters of divine judgment that fell from the heavens. He saw the watchers themselves being violently stripped of their heavenly glory, humiliated before their own eyes. He watched them being chained with spiritual chains and dragged into the depths of the abyss by angels. The heart-wrenching screams of the condemned watchers echoed amidst the thunder of the cataclysm that struck the earth. Noah was a shaken witness to how the Nephilim, those fearsome giants, saw their physical forms dissolve. But the spirits of those beings did not disappear along with their bodies in the waters of the great universal flood. They remained on the face of the earth as wandering, hostile, and invisible entities, roaming without body or rest. The oldest texts identify those entities as what future generations would call demons. This is precisely the vision that was surgically removed from the Book of Genesis before it reached your hands. He saw how the eternal prison for the rebellious children of God was being built in real time in the depths of the abyss. This is the moment that completely redefines the concepts of good and evil in the entire known history of humanity. They never taught you that the flood also swept away and chained rebellious angels, but the written evidence survived. The ancient scribes who carefully compiled the text of Genesis knew everything and chose to remain silent. The answer is a conspiracy of theological convenience, a truth that was too frightening to be taught. The waters finally receded, and the ark settled heavily on the mud of a completely transformed world. An overwhelming silence covered the entire land as Noah took his first trembling steps out of the vessel. He built an altar of gratitude, and God established an eternal covenant, while the rainbow appeared as a sign in the heavens. But Noah carried an invisible weight inside him that no celestial sign could relieve in his heart. He had gazed into the abyss with his own eyes and had witnessed the violent chaining of celestial beings. I knew that the world was no longer simply post-flood, but post a devastating cosmic war. He passed careful fragments of that truth to his 3 sons, Sem, Cam, and Japhet, who inherited pieces of the sacred testimony. They inherited not only lands and the promise of repopulating the world, but also a forbidden testimony about the war. The Mesopotamian myths of the flood and the Greek tales of Titans imprisoned in Tartarus share the same root. The Hindu stories of cosmic cataclysms and divine floods are distorted yet recognizable echoes of lived experiences. With the inexorable passage of generations, the original story was gradually sanitized and simplified. The Watchers faded into popular mythology, and the Nephilim were reduced to mere storybook giants. Censorship began systematically, and the official record transformed into a simplified and controllable narrative. But they could not completely destroy all the copies that had already been dispersed throughout the corners of the ancient world. Valuable fragments survived hidden in secret libraries and in the oral traditions of mystical communities. Now open Genesis in chapters 6 to 9 and read them with completely renewed attention. You will find the superficial story that we all know of the sons of God taking wives from the daughters of men. The Nephilim barely mentioned, God's deep sorrow, Noah's singular righteousness, and the construction of the ark. Who are those children of God mentioned so briefly, and why is their presence so cryptic? What happened to those beings after the flood, and why does the text offer absolutely no explanation? The text states that the Nephilim inhabited the earth both before and after the flood that supposedly wiped everything out. The evident contradictions are deliberate clues, visible seams where the censors closed the narrative. This is primary textual evidence of a systematic cover-up that has been perpetuated in silence for thousands of years. Through those cracks, the unmistakable light of another story that was deliberately hidden and suppressed seeps through. Theologians of the early centuries openly referenced the complete narrative of the Watchers and their fall. But when the official doctrine hardened over time, those references were marginalized and forgotten. The Bible you hold in your hands today is the result of historical decisions where certain books were voted on. The complete story of Noah's vision was precisely in those books that were declared dangerous. But it was the original and authentic story, the raw and unfiltered testimony of what really happened in the flood. And against all historical probability, that testimony did not completely disappear from the map of human civilization. The Book of Enoch does not appear in your current Bible, but it is cited in the New Testament by the Apostle Jude. Enoch, Noah's great-grandfather according to the biblical genealogy, was taken to heaven where enormous secrets were revealed to him. He detailed with proper names the fall of the Watchers, their corrupting teachings, and the inevitable judgment that awaited them. He even personally interceded before the throne of God for the fallen Watchers, but his request was firmly denied. The flood was the exact and precise moment of the definitive imprisonment of the angels who had rebelled against God. Noah was shown this truth in all its dimensions and was commanded to preserve that sacred knowledge for the future. He recorded it with his own hands in writings that constitute the forbidden text that miraculously reached us. Other important apocryphal texts add to the testimony and confirm this same hidden story from different angles. Together, they build a constellation of forbidden truth that orbits around the narrative core of the edited Genesis. This is the knowledge that entire empires and powerful religious congregations have feared for centuries without interruption. If Noah witnessed his judgment with his own eyes, then humanity has an active role as a witness against those powers. This knowledge elevates the human being from a mere passive subject to a conscious participant in the great universal cosmic drama. Who kept this dangerous truth alive while Bibles were censored and original texts burned in bonfires? The Guardians, secret communities that risked their own lives to preserve the original testimony intact. The Essene community of Qumran copied the Book of Enoch onto scrolls of parchment and hid them inside caves. They firmly believed that they were living in the last days and preserved the truth for the final generation. They were systematically persecuted, publicly denounced, and violently silenced, but their work never stopped. In Ethiopia, the Tewahedo Orthodox Church has never renounced the Book of Enoch and has kept it within its canon of scriptures. In medieval Kabbalah and later mystical currents, the echoes of fallen angels resurfaced with renewed strength. All these groups were guardians of the forbidden vision that Noah transmitted to his direct descendants after the flood. They protected that sacred knowledge at a huge cost, facing persecution, torture, and death for their cause. They were the organized resistance against a massive spiritual amnesia imposed by the institutions that controlled faith. And then, in the midst of the 20th century, the very earth returned the physical evidence it had kept for 2 millennia. That Bedouin shepherd in 1947 found the famous Dead Sea Scrolls in a cave not far from the ruins. Among the discovered manuscripts were multiple copies of the Book of Enoch, written in Aramaic and Hebrew of great antiquity. Those texts dated back several centuries before Christ, which proved that they could not be a Christian forgery. Jesus of Nazareth and his closest disciples likely knew this text, and the apostles themselves referenced it. Suddenly and irreversibly, the forbidden narrative had solid archaeological validity backed by science. 2 years earlier, in 1945, the Gnostic texts discovered at Nag Hammadi emerged from the sands of the desert in Egypt. They spoke of archons, fallen eons, and dark powers, clear variations on the same central theme of the Watchers. Renowned scholars, such as R.H. Charles and Gabriele Boccaccini, dedicated decades to reconstructing the complete puzzle. The original narrative of the flood was part of an infinitely broader, richer, and more coherent apocalyptic worldview. Noah's vision occupied an absolutely central place in that worldview that had been fragmented and dispersed. Scientific analyses of flood geology and comparisons of global mythology pointed in the same revealing direction. The accumulated evidence was overwhelming. The edited version of the flood in the Bible was a purely theological decision. It was not a faithful historical record of events, but a deliberate selection of what was allowed to be known. What generations of scholars discovered shows that primitive Judaism and Christianity were more complex. Early religious thought was deeply engaged with the problem of cosmic evil and its celestial origin. Noah contemplated the very root of that evil being locked away in the depths of the earth during the flood. And that evil root, according to the most reliable ancient texts, still tries to free itself from the chains that imprison it. Theologically, Noah's vision is a revelation that signifies that evil has an origin that transcends the human. It means that human sin is sometimes a symptom caused by external forces, not just an inherent disease. Divine judgment operates on multiple dimensions at once, attacking both spiritual corruption and moral failure. The entire cosmos is alive with conscious and intelligent forces, some loyal to the Creator and others openly rebellious. Noah witnessed with his own eyes the solemn execution of the cosmic law, and that transforms the entire biblical narrative. The struggle between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, described in Genesis, is not merely symbolic. The original serpent was a direct agent of the fallen Watchers, and the flood was God's ultimate backlash. Noah's preservation was the strategic protection of the pure human lineage destined to produce the promised Messiah. This is the great cosmic narrative that was simplified and reduced to become a children's fable without context. This is the story that finally gives meaning to the apostolic words about the struggle against invisible powers. Now examine the physical evidence that the earth itself has preserved as a silent testimony throughout the millennia. Megalithic structures distributed around the planet challenge conventional history due to their scale and perfection. Ancient traditions from multiple civilizations attribute those constructions to the giants of the world before the flood. Fossils of marine organisms found at the highest peaks of mountains challenge all conventional explanations. Uniform layers of catastrophic sediments cover the entire planet, leaving geological scars that persist to this day. Ancient iconography unsettlingly confirms this, as Mesopotamian seals depict divine beings cast into the abyss. Greek ceramics depict titans trapped beneath the earth, and Hindu reliefs narrate almost identical cataclysms. The collective memory of all humanity persistently remembers an event that was both physical and spiritual. Mount Hermon, the exact place where the Watchers descended according to Enoch, still bears the mark of that story. The earth itself bears witness with its scars that the story is true and that what Noah witnessed was absolutely real. Who actively opposed you knowing this truth throughout the centuries of civilization's history? In the 4th century, influential religious leaders consolidated the biblical canon and excluded dangerous books. Authority figures in antiquity argued strongly against the inclusion of the Book of Enoch in the scriptures. They considered it a text too fantastical and profoundly challenging to the established doctrine of original sin. It was doctrinally simpler to blame only Adam than to accept a celestial rebellion as the primary cause. The political power of antiquity also intervened, because the institutions needed total narrative control. The mystical texts that empowered individual revelation represented a direct threat to the established system. Official lists of permitted texts were imposed, and anything that remained outside was condemned to the fire. For entire centuries, the mere possession of certain ancient books could mean accusations and severe punishments. Those who spoke of the secret knowledge contained in the excluded texts were pursued without any mercy. Even the major movements of religious reform continued censorship, dismissing these texts as fiction. The suppression was absolutely systematic, a true spiritual information war that lasted over 1,000 years. The ultimate goal was to create total dependence on the institutional and controlled interpretation of the sacred scriptures. They were deeply afraid of what would happen if humanity knew that Noah saw angels being judged and chained before him. Now you know what was hidden for millennia by those who controlled the official narrative of faith and history. Noah saw with supernatural clarity the face of the cosmic enemy and beheld his defeat in the waters of the universal judgment. The texts attributed to Enoch describe him in detail. Noah saw the angels of punishment preparing to carry out the order. He contemplated Azazel being bound hand and foot with eternal chains, cast into the darkness of a barren and desolate place. He saw them desperately pleading for mercy without receiving it, while the waters of judgment dragged them into the abyss. The furious chaos of the waters was not blind destruction. It was the precise instrument of their imprisonment in the depths. The flood turned out to be not a senseless catastrophe, but the surgical removal of a malignant tumor within the cosmos. Noah understood that the corruption that had deceived and destroyed humanity had a clearly identifiable source. And that source was being definitively neutralized before their very eyes during those 40 days of trial. This vision contained a deep hope, because it meant that the evil we experience in this world has a limit. That evil has been judged in the flood, chained in the abyss, and awaits its final and definitive elimination. This is the piece that was missing in the incomplete puzzle that has been presented to us for centuries as the complete history. Without this truth, the flood appears as an unjust, disproportionate act of divine violence, lacking rational explanation. With her, the flood reveals itself as the absolutely necessary quarantine of a spiritual pandemic of universal scope. Noah contemplated the very origin of that pandemic while being locked away under 7 keys in the darkest depths of the abyss. He saw the hope of a new beginning for humanity slowly emerging from the waters that purified the world. That sacred testimony survived empires, brutal persecutions, and endless centuries of relentless censorship. The story they tried to erase from human record has arrived intact to this precise moment in the timeline. If this ancient knowledge has ignited something within you, subscribe to continue unearthing these mysteries together.